Greetings and welcome to a maddening episode of Genre Grinder. This month I am speaking with returning guest Betsy Jorgensen. Betsy, would you like to introduce yourself to anyone who hasn't listened to our previous very good episodes?
Yes, I am Betsy Jorgensen. I have done a podcast called Your Favorite Monsters, where we have talked about both Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated and Clone High. And we promise we'll come back someday with another thing, but we're still debating on what it will be.
So you finished off Clone High?
Yeah, we did.
I don't think I knew that.
It's not that long. It's only
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
It's only 13 episodes, so we kind of chewed through it. And me and my co-host Blake debated about what we were going to do next, but we've both been under a lot of stress. I work in cybersecurity, and he works with kids in public schools, and both of us have been a little stressed.
Well, you guys should do some of those shows that got cartoons that got canceled very quickly, so you only have 6 episodes to run through, or something like that. You should do Visionaries. Ask Blake about Visionaries. Visionaries is a personal favorite.
I will. So every cartoon that we talk about, we're like, oh, we should do that. We'll watch an episode. We'll be like, oh, this is a lot of problematic things. We liked terrible things when we were younger, didn't we?
It's either that or you rewatch it, like when I rewatched the original Ninja Turtles, and I realized I was just watching this for toy ads. I was literally watching it for the toy ads. They weren't sneaking toy ads in. I was waiting to see what would be in the toy aisles next.
Yeah.
What mutant would be in the toy aisles. So cartoons. Today we're going to talk about something that Betsy herself requested, which we're calling asylum horror.
Yes.
Which I've tried to define as a horror movie that takes place largely in or around some sort of mental asylum. Not horror movies that take place in a standard medical hospital, because there's a lot of hospital horror movies. And not movies where psycho killers are released or escape from asylums and early in the first act and then go kill people. So the original Halloween has scenes that take place in an asylum, but it's a slasher movie. It's not an asylum horror movie. And a lot of slasher movies and pre-slasher movies are about insane people. That there's a whole other thing going on there. And we're not going to cover a big large list like I did with the impossibly long thing I did with Patrick or Jim recently. We're gonna cover 4 movies.
Yeah.
We each picked 2. I picked a couple older ones that I realized might not qualify as horror now that I've watched them again. And Betsy picked, she picked one newer one, and then we sort of both talked about a different newer one that we ended up kind of co-picking, I guess.
Yeah. That kind of... We waffled around a couple.
Yeah.
I think probably the big thing with asylum horror is we kind of mashed a whole bunch of them. We threw a bunch of movies around, but we kind of waffled on which ones actually were asylum horror, because horror movies have kind of a rough relationship with mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, before we really get started, I do want to make it clear that I don't intend on making light of mental illness, even though these movies and a lot of other horror movies portray mental illness as an indication of evil or animalistic tendencies. It's not as common now, but it was definitely a thing for longer than it probably should have been. So there's a problematic quality that I want to establish is part of what makes an asylum horror movie, but also not something that's acceptable now. So if one of these movies was remade and kept all these aspects, that would be an issue. And I've personally never spent time in a mental health hospital. I was in a standard hospital for a while. But when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and related anxiety disorder. So, that is nowhere near as difficult an issue as a lot of people have gone through. And while I probably wouldn't have been tossed in an asylum in Victorian era, I understand, I've dealt with it my whole life, and I've had lots of loved ones that have dealt with it and needed medication. And I have visited people in the mental health hospitals over the years. So trying to be sensitive about this if I can, without totally ruining the fun of talking about these outdated movies.
Yeah, it is always an issue with things like asylum horror, where there are very scary aspects of this very real thing. Like, I have family and friends who have been affected by really genuinely scary mental illnesses. I have a cousin who is schizophrenic, and I've had I have visited friends in mental hospitals, and there are genuinely real life scary things about that, and none of them are things that are going to be portrayed in a horror movie, because those are not the kind of things that you want to go see for entertainment. And a lot of the things that get explored in horror movies are exploitative in a
Right.
lot of the very real ways that you were talking about, where mental illness patients are portrayed as evil or animalistic or villains when often they are victims.
Right.
So, especially when we're going back with some of the older movies, um, they are definitely a little less sensitive. But I think, like, with our choices here that we've made with our movies, I think it tells a very interesting story about filmmaking, especially as it's progressed, and
Yeah.
how asylums have been seen, like, especially in the film oeuvre.
So yeah, well, we'll do. I plan on doing this in chronological order, like I usually do. So the first one I picked was Bedlam from 1946. I originally thought this was the oldest movie that qualified as asylum horror, and that was just failure on my part because the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is very much, very clearly a horror movie that takes place in and around an asylum, and is one of the oldest and most famous horror movies ever made. So that was my fault. But I figure a lot of people have seen that, so we don't need to go that far back.
Mm.
And then also, there's a number of movies based on a single story, which we'll discuss in the next piece of this. That it doesn't come into play here. So, Bedlam is the last of 11 movies made on a low budget by producer Val Luton for RKO Pictures, and 9 of the 11 could charitably be considered horror movies, and those would be Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, The Leopard Man, Ghost Ship, The Seventh Victim, and Curse of the Cat People. It was the last in the series. There was 3 in the end of the series. They're all starred Boris Karloff, which were The Body Snatcher, Isle of the Dead, and this movie. And this one was directed by Mark Robson, who had directed Seventh Victim, Ghost Ship, and Youth One's Wild, which is, along with Madame Fifi, one of the 2 non-horror ones. And the most famous guy who worked with Luton was Jacques Turner, and Robson edited some of Turner's titles. So it has a very good pedigree coming into it. But I will say that this is the first time I'd seen this particular one. I'd seen the other ones, the other horror ones, several times actually. They're all on Shudder except for this one. And I don't think Bedlam's bad, but it's definitely mediocre and the least of the series, considering Luton, Robson, and Karloff are, pretty much at the top of their powers. I just assume that this was a point when the box office just wasn't there anymore. So they
Yeah.
probably were dealing with less. And there is a loose historical factuality here. There is Bedlam Royal Hospital, which had the nickname Bedlam, which is where the phrase Bedlam comes from, the
Yeah.
meaning madness breaking out.
And there was it's vaguely based on a series of paintings,
Yes,
and
which is strange.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, William Hogarth,
Yes.
painter from the 18th century, and was called A Rake's Progress. It was a series of paintings, and they, which is funny because I've been watching a lot of very bad exploitation movies lately that purposely try to steal ideas and then get in trouble for it. But in this case, they credited Hogarth as a co-writer because they loosely based it on his paintings of what was sort of real events.
Which is wild.
Yeah, I mean, like, they wanted that good William Hogarth box office.
They wanted that sweet, sweet artistic merit.
Yeah,
Mwah.
which, might have been a Val Lewton issue where he was getting so much credit for doing so much with so little that he is like, this is real art. I'm doing it now.
Yeah, maybe. I also wondered, like, they play up this, like, beauty at the mercy of madmen kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it also reminded me a lot of the historical... So, I think it was in the U.S. Nellie Bly is this reporter, and I can't remember. She was an American journalist who is actually super important when it comes to asylums. She was a reporter who went undercover into asylums and pretended to be a madwoman and did a huge expose after getting terrible treatment and basically came out on the other side and said, basically she was the pioneer of investigative journalism, and basically blew the cover out on how abusive asylums were. And
she's sort of represented in American Horror Story Asylum. I can't remember who's playing her, but there's an investigative journalist who goes in and gets stuck. I can't remember the actress's name, but yeah, American Horror Story Asylum being the best of that series.
Yeah,
And she was also the inspiration, I believe, for Sam Fuller's Shock Corridor, which is a similar story. It's a male undercover journalist who goes in and sort of loses himself inside after he's not sure if he is crazy or not, which I guess because it's based on a thing that actually happened becomes really common in these movies.
Yeah.
That like our audience surrogate is some sort of undercover for one reason or another.
Yeah. She worked for Pulitzer. I couldn't remember which famous person she worked for. But because the main character of Bedlam is named Nell, and because her whole, like, plot is she goes in and is this beauty who helps expose...
Tame the beasts.
That just does all this good. I was wondering how much of her name was supposed to invoke this person who helped uncover the great corruption within the asylum through her beauty and her whatever. But who knows? It could have...
Well, one thing I like about it is that she's not immediately painted as a good person. She's
she's not.
She's an aristocratic asshole in the first act. And that's really this movie is it's really not a movie about mental health or hospitals, or it's really about the way rich people treat poor people and for their enjoyment and do what I'm saying is what's best because I'm your better kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it which is I we didn't watch a million of these movies, but I'm pretty sure that's a thread that would go through a bunch of them. Is that basic theme. And yeah, like you were saying, it definitely portrays the mental patients as kind of animals who need to be tamed.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised that they're not the villains though.
No.
They're sort of like a force of nature in a lot of cases. Some of them are actual characters.
Yeah.
But the villain is Boris Karloff, and he's a villain, and he knows he's a villain. It's a little bit thinner of a character than he plays a little bit more ambiguous characters than the other two Luton movies he's in. So he's sort of having fun. Like, if you're a Karloff fan, it's definitely worth seeing this movie because he's just being a prick.
Yeah, he really is.
A really eloquent prick. Which, you know, he didn't do that often. That wasn't necessarily his... He wasn't Vincent Price.
Nah. I do think he had fun playing against Anna Lee.
Mm-hmm.
I think she did a very good job in this.
Yeah, I mean, the
acting is good. Yeah. It's just it is not a great movie.
And it's also, by the time you get to the end, it's really not a horror movie. It really is a sort of dark drama.
Yeah.
That is an allegory for something else. Mm-hmm. And what was also interesting to me about what we were saying about the treatment of mentally ill people, I was sort of taken aback watching this, which was, you know, the 40s. It was really, I think that the reason it had any sort of progressive quality to it is that in the 40s, we were looking back, and in the 60s, but basically 40s through 60s, a lot of British horror in particular is looking backwards at the sort of cruelty of aristocratic sciences and class, and sort of going, can you believe how savage our community rulers were back then? Of, you know, sort of like, oh, it was insane what it was back then. Can you imagine? Look at the horrible things they did to people. In reality, that I don't think British prime minister and government got much better, but
yeah,
it feels like there was something about in a lot of the Hammer horror movies, they really made Peter Cushing's Frankenstein is very much a villain in the Hammer Frankenstein movies, who's doing these savage, shitty things, which you don't see that in a lot of Frankenstein movies. Usually, Frankenstein is either sort of wretch, or he's just out of his league and doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think about like the first big scene where you see the party and they bring out one of the patients that they've painted gold to like pose as a statue for the party. Yeah. And the commentary track talks about how like the person who was playing that statue actually fainted because they painted too much of the person, but which is also wild.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, okay, the movie. You do know that actors are people, right? But the idea that the mentally ill in the movie were forces of nature, were less than human. And, like, some of them became people as they got more characterizations, but not to the people who were treating them.
Right.
It often has a parallel a lot of the time in movies that have minorities in them of the time, where minorities will not have agency.
Yeah, I mean, you could put I Walked with a Zombie in that category very easy. And also The Leopard Man.
Yeah.
Both have that kind of issue going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Luton was definitely not... For how progressive he was on women's gender politics and stuff like that, he didn't necessarily... It was still the 40s.
Yeah. I mean,
And these were still B movies. I mean, they all look fantastic, but they were very low budget. And they were, I mean, they're black and white in a time when color was a sign of prestige.
Yeah.
I think just the fact that a lot of them are so good, that's something that is forgotten when you look back on movies from these eras, is that they were made to make a quick buck, and most critics probably considered them trash.
Yeah.
It sort of ends on a, which has no historical precedence as far as I could tell, on the idea that she has sort of transformed it, and it will be a good hospital now.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure it became a better hospital, but there's no like legend of one rich woman who went in there and fixed everything.
Oh, absolutely not. Bedlam pretty much had.
There's a reason there's a word.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Bethlehem Hospital's history was people used to come in and buy tickets to watch the mad people. And they, because people who had been put in there were money makers for the hospital, and it's terrifically horrible. The history of treatment of mental illness is a horror story in itself, especially through the era of the idea that people who are mentally ill had done it to themselves and or were cursed by God. Yeah. Like, we not only have like a society who is blaming the people who are sick on their own misdeeds, and that they have some kind of moral failing that must be punished, and they must be kept safe from the rest of society. There's then this moral superiority that we can have over them, that they must be kept in filth. We can then also come and laugh at them.
Right.
And profit? Yeah, it sounds great. Ugh.
One of the facts I learned while listening to books on tape, or audiobooks is what we call them now because we're not 40 in our 40s, was the phrase mongoloid, which is a very outdated and offensive term for people with Down syndrome. It was coined because it was a way of telling families that had these babies with Down syndrome that these weren't actually their children. They were actually the children of Mongol invaders, that their sort of bloodline had gotten mixed in with all of ours because they had raped and pillaged so many. And so you could throw these children, these actual children, into these asylums and just forget about them and not feel guilty about it because it wasn't really your child. It was some long dead Mongol invader's child. And that was a fact I never knew. And that was the idea that you use it as an excuse to forget children was even worse to me than the idea. Yeah.
Woof.
Yeah. So that's where that term comes from. That's why we don't use that term, not just because it's not accurate, but also because it has a lot of horrible connotations behind it. But yeah, the idea of just dumping children in these places, that is the horror of it. And in this movie hints at that. One interesting thing that happens in this movie that I didn't know about, that I assume is true, is certain artists are institutionalized and then make practically free art for these aristocrats. So like a guy is writing, I believe he's writing poetry or sonnets or something, and it just to ensure that he doesn't get in like chained to a wall or something. And that makes sense too. If artists are commonly tortured people, so it's probably pretty easy to get them institutionalized if they're not already rich, and then you just benefit off their paintings or their songs or their poems. That was something that never even dawned on me before, but that's another thing that makes it feel like it's more about class than actual mental illness.
Well, you've got the idea of a debtor's prison, where if you go into debt, you no longer have your freedom.
Right.
But you also have the corresponding, long-standing, let's call it mythology, around Van Gogh, with his madness allowed him to paint, even though any of his struggles with mental illness kept him from being able to create. It was the treatment of his illnesses that allowed him to be able to create.
Right.
But again, the places that you could get those treatments were places that did not treat you well.
Yeah.
So yeah, no.
Your best case was in this movie. There's sort of the higher class of mental patients that have card games that they play and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and they are sort of protected from, the wretches of, people are like left in cages and holes and
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff. So even within the mental asylum, there's still an echelon of class going on.
Yep.
Uh,
It's pretty bleak.
yeah. And so I guess that kind of makes it work as a horror movie, even though it has a happy-ish ending, uh, where she does help people. And I guess the horror movie part that Karloff's character, it's an interesting thing where Karloff's character gets kidnapped and held hostage, and they have a sort of kangaroo court,
Yeah.
which which I realize happens in Batman all the time.
Oh yeah.
Like Batman getting kidnapped and having Arkham Asylum do some sort of, like, there's episodes of cartoons, but it's based on things that happen in the comics. And then it sort of happened in I think the last of the Chris Nolan movies. There's a scene where Scarecrow is presiding over
Yeah, I think so.
a sort of
Yeah.
court of criminals. So that's kind of amusing to me that they did that. And they do the thing that happens in all the Batman movies, is that they decide that he's ultimately not responsible for everything, and that it's not like Batman usually is let go or whatever, but in this case they decide that it's not right of them to keep him, and he only gets his comeuppance because of the quiet lady in the corner that actually is a weird mainstay of all of these movies that we watch. Practically, there's at least 3 out of 4 of these movies have the quiet lady who stands in the corner and doesn't really do much until certain points, and when she's needed to do. In this case, she's needed to murder the antagonist so that he gets comeuppance, because I'm sure there were some kind of, what do you call it, rules about that they couldn't have let the what is it called, the pre ratings. There was a thing called the
Hays Code?
Hays Code. That's it. So I'm sure it had something to do with the Hays Code not letting criminals get away with
Yeah.
criminal or deviant behavior, so they had to kill him. But the idea that the insane people are of sound enough mind to take responsibility and not just revenge.
Yeah.
It was an interesting way. I think the last act is all really pretty good.
Yeah, well,
I think.
yeah. Well, it also goes to the whole idea that they are more forces of nature, because nature can't, if they are like as beasts, they can't have evil thoughts.
Right.
So if they revenged, then they would have been human.
Right.
So it is that kind of catch-22 of, if they would have had enough agency to be vengeful about their treatment, then they would have had enough agency to be people. But because they were like, oh no, we cannot find him guilty for this, because lo, it was, he could,
Yeah.
it's one of those that is sort of progressive, sort of, by being like,
I mean, yeah, for what they're doing.
yeah, it's weird. It's one of those where it's like,
it's sort of like how we still have that thing with autistic children with superpowers. Is still like, there was just one in the Predator reboot sequel movie that's still an issue, and it's this really not pandering is not the right word, but it's like a way of saying, look at how beautiful this mind is, and it's romanticizing something without giving any agency to the characters.
yeah,
With the problem, so we still do this in a way that's like, no, they're good people, but they're not really people either.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's good for its era, and it's honestly better than a lot of your 80s slasher movies in particular, which are just like, this guy escaped and he's just gonna murder the shit out of everyone, like it, or this guy has had some sort of post-traumatic stress thing happen and it's turned him into a murderer, and
yeah,
that kind of stuff.
yeah.
So
And then they completely Poe ending him. There's a lot of there's a line of Poe through a lot of this.
Well, yeah, and in fact, okay, I think we can. Unless you had something more to say, I will move on to the next
Yeah,
one
let's do
with
it.
that one,
Yeah.
because
This is
basically
my attempt at a
half.
segue.
Yeah, it's an awesome segue. Basically, like 99% of every one of these movies is based on Edgar Allan Poe's The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, which was first published in 1845. It is the basis for, and I'm going to do my best here, The System of Dr. Gudron, aka and the sorry, which is also known as The System of Dr. Gudron and the Lunatics, which is a French movie from Maurice Turner from 1913. Unheimlich oh boy, I'm bad at German too. Geschichten, which is called The Living Dead here in America, is a also from the teens from Richard Oswald. There's a Spanish anthology movie with several versions of different stories called Manicomio, which was released in the 40s. There's a S.F. Brownrigg movie called Don't Look in the Basement from the 70s, which is this mega low budget American drive-in movie that I think just didn't have the correct copyright because it's always on TV and it's always part of those 40 movies for $10 DVD sets. It's really trashy. And then there's a Czech film. I will not try to pronounce the Czech title, but it's called Lunacy. That is also based on it. But then the one we're covering here is a Mexican film that's known as The Mansion of Madness, or La Mansión de la Locura, and it was called Dr. Tar's Torture Dungeon or Dr. Tar's Torture Pit in some countries, directed by Juan López Moctezuma. I made them. This is also not quite a horror movie. It's sold as a horror movie. Obviously, Dr. Tar's Torture Dungeon. This is actually a surrealist comedy.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
With some horrifying elements.
I mean, it ends how if somebody had pitched this to me as a comedy, I would have slapped them.
Yeah, well, it's a foreign made film, and like a lot of surrealist movies from the 60s and 70s, it's difficult to judge which parts were meant to be funny and which parts are meant to be, because this is another one that's clearly just this is a metaphor for class. And apparently, I was reading up on it, and apparently the Poe story is assumed to be a metaphor for class as well.
Yeah, I can believe that.
And the idea in the story is that a young, usually young, in this case, I guess he's not that young, psychologist or psychiatrist goes to an insane asylum where he witnesses just weird shit, and it's revealed that the guy who is the superintendent and the lead doctor actually has, along with other inmates, taken over the asylum and are posing as doctors. And they have imprisoned all the other the real doctors and nursing staff and everybody. And so I mean, it's a simple story, and it's a story you've probably heard a million times. And this is the Mexican surrealist version of it. And I think I liked it a lot more than you did, but it's because there's something about this specifically Mexican surrealism that kind of appeals to me. And so you have to really be you have to take into account that it's going to be obnoxious, because a lot of it is performance art. And performance art is the only thing more obnoxious than surrealist comedy.
Yep. Yep.
And it's not something. It's something that grew on me over the years. And it's also very pretentious. Just surrealism in general of all types it takes a certain level of pretentiousness, because you either have to fully embrace your metaphorical meaning, or you have to fully embrace this sort of Dadaist idea that there's no such thing as meaning. And both those things are pretty pretentious.
And I can get down with Dada.
Yeah.
The graphic and brutal rape, like,
Yeah.
real early. Like, just
Yeah, it's
real early. That is used basically to throw away a character that is neither acknowledged nor affects any of the characters, that is
yeah, and
kind of used as a joke, does actually ruin it for me.
yeah, and that's really early in the movie, so I assume that's something that's because it's in different versions. I know of the adaptations. There's people who sort of are with the guy when he comes to the insane asylum, and they're attacked by the crazies.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because her rape is mostly off screen, but the way it's done, I'm sure that there were certain rules in Mexico at the time about what you were allowed to show. But it's still really brutal, and
Well,
it's
it's off screen in the way that it's
the
just off screen.
yeah, and the part that's off screen is the bad part. Like all the chasing and the holding down and all that other horrible stuff is all on screen.
Yeah,
Um,
like when you say it's off screen, it's not like they pan away from the room and stuff. It's like it's in a forest and he runs after her and basically tackles her to off screen, and then the camera goes up a little bit to give them room for thrusting.
right.
Like,
It's not I spit on your grave, but it's still
yeah.
pretty severe. And I do think it was probably one of those things that had some sort of meaning in it. What's interesting about it is that watching it, and I had watched it years ago. It was one of those things. There was a weird video store in Phoenix, Arizona, that had a lot of bootleg horror and cult movies. So I rented it, and I probably saw it when I was like 19 or 20. So I didn't really remember any of it, and I think I actually had it confused with Juan López Moctezuma's next movie, which was called Alucarda, which is more of a nunsploitation thing. It's like sort of like Ken Russell's The Devils, but also, and it's also, that's right, it's also sort of the sapphic vampire novella Carmilla.
Ah, yeah.
So it's like Carmilla meets the Devil's nunsploitation thing. It's a lot more of just an over the top horror movie kind of thing than this one is. This one has a lot of long scenes of they've clearly just had local performance artists and visual artists set up a sort of a sort of like area that they're going to then walk the camera through. There's a lot of the camera movement's actually really interesting because a lot of it is lopped off, and they'll just film through some sort of sculpture or something.
Which, I mean, which is kind of fun and wild. Like,
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, like tonally, it reminded me of Wicker Man.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. That sort of, because Wicker Man's also sort of a comedy
yeah,
where someone is out of their depth and sort of being led around by people who know what's up
yeah,
that he just thinks are crazy, but they're actually sort of in charge. Yeah, you're right. That's a good comparison.
yeah.
Um,
And that there's definitely, like, they have a plan and they're doing something, and there's something vaguely sinister going on, but he doesn't quite know what it is. I think the key difference for at least me as the audience member was the rape, and that there was that weird. So the main character goes with the head of the asylum, who, as we know, is actually a patient who has kidnapped.
he's sort of like staged a revolt and
Yeah,
took over.
yeah. And I can't remember actually. Does he say that the person the old head of the asylum's daughter is his daughter?
Yes, I believe he claims her as his
Okay.
daughter.
So he basically just steps into the feet of the head of the asylum and adopts the daughter of the head of the asylum. And the head of the asylum's daughter is the only one who is from the old regime. And you have no idea if she is going along with it or not, or if she's one of the bad people. But she is definitely at least playing along for
Right.
most of the movie. Um, and so that whole thing is going on. But you have the one character who's going along with the head of the asylum, but you have the other guy who is in the cab with his wife who just got
Mm-hmm.
raped.
Yeah, and that's like
And he just
it never.
leaves her there.
Yeah, and and again, I'm sure that there was some sort of like if they sat down the director and talked to me about it, he would be like, "Oh, this is meant to represent
Something.
blah blah blah, the rape of something something."
Something.
Um,
But
yeah,
just lost Betsy as an audience member to see a guy jump away into the woods, leaving his wife behind after she had been brutally raped by someone. And I'm like, and then kind of laughing with somebody else about, like, just being useless. I'm like, you have made no effort to go back to get your wife or
hmm
girlfriend or whoever, your compatriot.
well, it also is the easily the worst and most boring part of the movie is them trying to escape and getting recaptured
Yeah, it's
because
terrible.
it feels like an attempt at making a regular movie instead of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has a big dip in the middle around that part where there's just these escape scenes that don't really go anywhere, and then it sort of goes back to where it was, and that's where a lot of the sort of what I've been calling performance art picks up.
Yeah. And then it's
Um,
fine. Like,
yeah,
once they basically they needed to get the other guy from the carriage back because they needed another character of a certain, and I'm just like, it's sloppy writing.
yeah,
And
yeah. It's a kind of movie where the writing is like you honestly wonder if there was a script for
yeah,
a lot of it,
yeah, you
if
do.
they just sort of had these local artists and actors doing their thing and just sort of cut it together after the fact. Um, I did a little research into this at the risk of sounding like I know what I'm talking about, which I really don't. Surrealism has an extensive history in Mexico.
Mhm.
Louis Buñuel, who is probably maybe the most important figure of 20th surrealist movement, alongside Dali, relocated to Mexico from Spain with a lot of other French and Spanish artists, and continued working there. And Frida Kahlo is one of our most revered. I mean, she was loved at the time, but in the time since, in the decades since,
Mhm.
Frida Kahlo has become one of the most revered female painters, let alone surrealist painters, or let alone that, but female painters of all time. And she worked alongside Gunther Gerzo and a Chilean artist who had really relocated there, Roberto Mata, whose work is really cool. I was looking at it. And Buñuel sort of set up the idea of Mexican surrealist cinema. He had made some stuff there, but it was really 1970 or late 60s. Alejandro Jodorowsky, who's another Chilean, he came and he did Fondo Elise, El Topo, which
Ah,
became
yes.
the Midnight movie,
Oh, El Topo.
and the Holy Mountain were all made in Mexico with Mexican crews. And once you know that, and then you realize that Moctezuma was friends with him and was an assistant on both El Topo and Fondo Elise, and that this movie was released around the same time as Holy Mountain, you're like you start to see all of, oh yeah, this is Jodorowsky light
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and it starts to make more sense because Jodorowsky's movies will have metaphorical rape scenes that are usually less cruel in most cases, but he'll have really like violence will be about something else, and he'll have situations where there'll be a very big set piece made by a famous artist. In this case, sets and costumes were designed by Lorena Carrington
Mm-hmm.
and her son Gabriel Wise, who were pretty famous surrealists in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
So they would have these canvases to do stuff on, and then you would sort of like this one isn't quite a mountain. I almost said Mountains of Madness.
Mm-hmm.
Mansion of Madness isn't quite as
I've caught myself almost saying that like 3 times.
yeah.
So.
It's easy to do. It's not quite as episodic as El Topo or especially The Holy Mountain, which is entirely episodic, but it still has that sort of episodic quality, which is why the plot is based on a short story, and it sort of just takes the beats. It's really about scene to scene
Mm-hmm.
stuff happening and how much that works for you as a viewer. I don't want to say that this movie is passing value judgment on the clinically insane people. Again, it's using them as sort of a prop. They're really part of the painting, if you will.
It is not, I don't think, passing a value judgment on them as a whole.
You're right. There are the guards, the rapists are
Yeah.
pretty.
Well,
They're pretty much villains.
but like the guy who takes over the asylum and the rapists and the guards that he convinces to kill people are definitely the evil insane.
Yeah.
And so there is a contingent of malicious insane in there that are definitely on this side of villainous, malicious, insane that I think is definitely on the insane asylums are places where bad things are. And
like it's the asylum itself has an evil in it that is then taking away the agency of these other characters. It does the thing where the insane people who don't really have character will turn. That's something you see in a lot of these types of movies, the ones that are taking place in the asylums, is that the sort of rabble they're not necessarily going along with the bad guy or the good guy, and they can be used to turn sides as the story needs.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, they
which I'm sure is a class warfare thing. I'm positive, which it is not a particularly progressive one because it's kind of implying that the poor don't have agency and that they need to be ushered. But I think that's what they're going for.
I mean there are people there and we just want to rule them.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think I do enjoy most of this movie. Again, yeah, like you said, there's a rape scene that doesn't really have much. It's not allegorical enough. It's not obviously allegorical enough to serve much of a purpose.
I mean, and a lot of that is just because the person who is raped has no character other than to be a victim. She has no place in the story afterwards. The people who attack her are monsters. They don't have characters before or afterwards other than to be monsters. And the part of the story that it is just to add horror.
And it's not even really fridging, come to think about it.
No.
Because it doesn't really spur the male hero to do anything.
It doesn't affect anybody.
Yeah.
Like, it is so gratuitous because it doesn't even, it removes a character from a story in such a way that it removes the character from the motivation. It is the weirdest choice. Like, and I will fully admit that I might just not get the cultural connotation of it, but it was bad for me.
Yeah, well, and I wonder, it was cut by, and this is already a pretty short movie, it was cut by 11 minutes by the American distributors to make it more of a horror movie. And I wonder if that scene was cut because it serves no purpose to what, especially if you're trying to create a narrative, or if it was left in because it's one of the things that's definitively horror.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to hunt down, because I don't think the Dr. Tar's torture dungeon version exists anywhere that I can find it, but it would be kind of interesting to know if what the American distributors considered worth.
Yeah. Keep it in.
Yeah.
I mean, my
But it is and then like I said, the middle part, or the end of the second act where they're trying to escape and not making it out, is, for me, that was just dull, and I can't appreciate a surrealist comedy slash horror movie to have. I can't appreciate if it's dull. Like that's like one thing you should not be doing.
yeah,
If
you have to
that's
keep
your
have to
goal.
keep it going. Got to be snappy.
Yeah. um.
However, we do have our murder siren who
Yeah.
invokes the French Revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think
which was bizarre, but fine. I loved that.
ultimately I'd recommend watching a la carta, and then if you like that, then check this one out.
Yeah, just
I haven't seen the other one. Is Mary Mary Bloody Mary was his most straight horror film. I've never seen that one, but it's apparently more of a straightforward vampire movie.
I think if you know the rape is coming, like
Yeah,
can,
and it's
you'll know what's going on, and they don't really cut away, so just skip it. You're fine.
yeah.
Like the rest of it, there's a funny guy who dresses up like a chicken. He's
Hmm.
worth the price of entry.
All those scenes where they're sort of having like a party
Yeah.
kind of thing, which is in the original story. It reminded me of there's a movie I really like by Teru Ishii called The Horrors of Malformed Men, which is based on Edgora Rampo, who is the sort of Japanese guy who his name was supposed to sound like Edgar Allan Poe. Rampo was this sort of, he wrote a lot of stories like that were taking off on the sort of quality of Poe's stories, but they were always more perverse and kind of silly and strange. And Horrors of Malformed Man is a sort of secret anthology with a bunch of these stories in it. And there's a part towards the end of the movie. It's similar. It's basically the director hired a lot of performance artists to just sort of do their thing and film it, and it wasn't really necessarily part of the plot because there isn't a plot anymore at that point. It really reminded me of that. That came out the year before this, and I prefer that to this. But there's something fun of the just paying a bunch of performance artists and costume designers to just goof off and
Yeah.
do their thing. So yeah, I would recommend those two first, and then if you're still in the mood, especially if you've sat down and you decided I'm going to watch every version of the system of Dr. Tar I can possibly find, then yeah, this is an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
So then the next thing we watched, without realizing it, was also based on the system of Dr. Tar and Professor
Yeah.
Feather. And I don't want to say this is necessarily a more true version of the story because it really expands on it a lot.
Yeah, but it's a more coherent movie.
Right. It's more of a movie and it takes it more seriously, and it's more realistic as to what Victorian and the very beginning of the Victorian era, I believe, is when it's taking place.
Yeah.
What asylum life was and mental health medicine was like at the time. This is from 2014. It's directed by Brad Anderson, and that part of the reason I kind of wanted to watch it is because he had made his big breakthrough was a haunted asylum movie called Sessions 9 that
Session
is pretty
9.
beloved.
1.
Yeah. That's about some guys who are supposed to, I believe they're stripping fire retardant stuff from inside this haunted asylum to get it ready to be renovated.
Yeah.
Asbestos is the word I'm looking for. Stripping asbestos, and they sort of start to experience the hauntings, and it's a much more subtle kind of haunting. And I like the idea that that I don't think this is actually what happened, but in my mind, Brad Anderson had this breakthrough movie, and then he got to make The Machinist, which is the one where Christopher Bale got scary skinny, and that was his only real brush with Hollywood, and it didn't really go over. So he decided to years later return to Asylum horror, just to see if he could do anything with it.
And then he made Stonehearst Asylum.
Yeah, and he made Stonehearst Asylum, which has almost nothing in common with Sessions 9.
Yeah.
And again, really is pushing the horror aspect. This is a psychological thriller / drama.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yeah, it really is. It is fun.
Yeah. I was suspicious of it because it's technically American made, and the cast is huge. It's got Kate Beckinsale, Jim Sturgis is the lead. I guess he's not a huge deal. David Thewlis, Brendan Gleeson. You got 2 Harry Potter people right in a row. Ben Kingsley as a secondary lead. Michael Caine, Jason Fleming, who's a personal favorite, has a couple scenes.
Yeah,
But
I
I don't
Michael
think this
Caine that got me. Actually,
yeah, and you at first think he's not going to have any scenes, but he does. He has flashback scenes.
Yeah, he does.
But this wasn't released in American theaters, as far as I can tell. And that sometimes you hear these movies and like they have big stars in them, you never heard of them, and it turns out they were like made in Canada or something. You're like, oh, that makes sense. But this one wasn't. So I was a little like, well, I haven't never heard of this. And then the fact that it's not a straight horror movie or a dopey action movie, that was another red flag. Like how badly received was this movie that also changed its name from Eliza Graves to Stonehearst Asylum, apparently late in production.
Yep.
Which is another bad sign. But it has a made for TV kind of vibe to it.
It does.
But
it does. It's not bad.
But, no, I mean the parts that work pretty well, I think. It
I mean, it's not good.
No, but the cast is. I think Jim Sturgis is not great because he's just not great.
Yeah.
He's the guy who was in was it called 21, and he was in Across the Universe, the Beatles musical. I just don't have a lot of.
I don't.
I mean, and then he's acting alongside like David Thewlis and Ben Kingsley.
Yeah.
They're just, and Kate Beckinsale and him have zero chemistry, and a lot of the plot is predicated on them having enormous, almost immediate chemistry.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a problem too.
Yeah. And, I mean, Kate Beckinsale's real nice to look at, but
she's in a very thankless role. I think this is a. I don't know. You could have some really interesting actress just make it kind of wild, I guess.
I mean, yeah, because it's.
But she isn't allowed to do a lot.
I like looking at Kate Beckinsale.
Oh yeah,
but
I mean,
I would not say
she
that
was
she's...
in her late 40s or in her mid 40s when she made this movie. I think. What the hell?
But I would not have put money down on that.
Yeah.
Okay, I take back everything that I was about to say. She's amazing. I was going to say that she isn't... I was trying to think of what else I'd seen her in recently, and then I was like, wait, she was in the Underworld movies, and she did great in that, and I enjoyed watching every bit of her in those.
Yeah, I mean, she's the reason to watch them. With one of them was really awful. I can't remember. I think it was Blood Wars, which would have been made just directly after this. Was the one that was just so boring I almost turned it off.
Yeah, but like she'd been doing them forever. She can't make
no,
that
I mean,
direct
and she and Michael Sheen and I guess what's his name's in a couple. Bill Nighy's in a couple of them. They're the reason to watch them.
Yeah, Bill Nighy talking about Underworld is the best because he's like, I don't do stunts. That's why we've hired stuntmen. They need to work.
I'm looking at her. She's been working pretty regularly, but just not.
No, she just does. She doesn't do big movies. It's fine.
No, she doesn't really want to. She's unfortunately married to the director of the Underworld movies, who is just the boringest guy. But oh no, they got divorced. She's cool again. Anyway, so her character. So this is the same plot as the last movie. Guy has gone to look into an insane asylum where, unbeknownst to him, there has been a coup d'état, and in this case, Ben Kingsley has taken over with the assistance of some of the other patients and locked the evil doctor, who is Michael Caine, and his assistants down in the basement,
And is
in the
keeping
boiler
them.
room. Yes.
And is keeping them. Is he keeping them drugged up? I can't remember. It's been a while.
No,
since I've seen
actually,
it.
one of the things. So what's interesting about this is you can tell it was made in the post New Millennium, because it does a very interesting thing with this story that Kingsley's character is actually good for the patients, and he by helping them instead of torturing them, because Michael Caine's guy in the flashbacks we learned just basically literally tortures mental illness out of people.
Yes.
So there's a sort of tragedy that the Kingsley's character is actually pretty good at this. And they also reveal the twist way earlier in the story. Like it's at the end of the first act that Beckinsale pulls him aside. And so Beckinsale's similar character to the daughter in Mansion of Madness, but what her story is that she is someone who's basically an abused wife who might have some either they don't understand how PTSD works, or she also has some sort of seizure disorder, where she has been, because she has fought back against her husband, she's been he's institutionalized her, which was a thing you could do back then.
Yep.
Probably still can pull off in some communities. And
let's be real.
So
you can absolutely do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm positive there's still cases of people who, women in particular, being considered a danger to themselves and others, and being put into our modern version. I guess you call them mental hospitals now. I don't even think that's the correct term anymore.
Institutions, I think, is still
institutions.
the euphemistic
So
term.
she is she's helping because she sees that it's better this way, and so and then at the same time knows that she's protected here, because if she ends up back with her husband, he'll probably kill her or continue abusing her. And so that's why it's kind of a thankless role, because she has to sort of be den mother and love interest and keep the peace, and doesn't really get to do a lot else in the movie.
Yeah.
But so yeah, there's the indication that everything is actually better with the inmates having taken over, but that they're no longer getting deliveries of supplies, so there is no medicine to go around. And the Jim Sturgis character decides, well, after he figures this out, he decides he's going to try to undermine this and figure out a way to stop it. But the longer he stays, the more he realizes maybe Ben Kingsley's a good person. And then it has to do that thing that so many movies, like, mainstreamish movies, have to do, where they present a conundrum. It has two sides, and you realize one side is inherently correct in moral sense, in the real world moral sense, so they have to introduce a reason why we won't follow them anymore.
Yeah.
Like in Captain America Civil War, clearly Iron Man is in the right. And it's just no way I can morally like, I think most of the audience is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So they have to introduce, oh yes, but they're throwing people into superhero prison without trials. And so, like, well, now we can't support Iron Man anymore. So in this case, Kingsley gets pissed off because he does have problems. We discover that he mercy killed a whole bunch of people during war.
Yeah.
And sort of drove him mad. And so he has Michael Caine's character basically entirely fried by early ECT, electroshock therapy. So because he's done something so brutal, I guess it pushes him over the edge. So then he lets the patients do more and more violent things. So it doesn't really make sense that it would happen, because basically there's two really awful people. One is the David Thewlis character, who's one of the guards, and then his sort of secondhand guy. Most of the other patients aren't really villains.
Yeah, it's this the the reason this works as a horror story is the patients have taken over the asylum is like, okay, well maybe the patients are doing a better job. Oh wait, no, they can't possibly be, because the inherent irrationality of mental illness causes instability.
The more interesting twist would have been that the audience surrogate character, Sturgis's character, would have realized that they were in the right and supported them, but nobody would have the authority, and it would all go back to shit, and he would have no control over it.
Yeah,
that would be the real scary ending.
Yeah, it would have been.
But instead, they take it to shit. I kept on hoping for another twist, and then they had one, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Where the Sturgis character, they take forever. He's there specifically for Kate Beckinsale.
Yeah.
And at first you think he claims to be a student who'd seen her, but it turns out that he's himself an escaped mental patient who the Brendan Gleeson doctor says may just be a shell and just takes on the personality of whoever he's around, and
which is so dumb.
Yeah, and so I was waiting the whole time for a secondary twist. I'm like, oh, they put that twist early because there's gonna be a second twist, and then there was one, and I was like, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
I wish I hadn't asked for that. This was clearly my own fault.
Yes. Well, and I think both this and Mansions of Madness really heavily inspired a movie that we almost talked about, but decided we didn't. But then we delayed recording this, and I ended up watching it again anyway. Shutter Island.
Which is based on a book, so 2010, the Martin Scorsese movie.
Yeah.
So I think my assumption is, now knowing that these were all based on the Poe story, is that Shutter Island had some basis in the Poe story.
I mean, it had to.
And it's sort of the same twist, except for that the protagonist is the secret insane person.
Yeah.
And that there's sort of... So, like, Ben Kingsley is in both movies, and in one he plays a pretend doctor, and the other one he plays sort of a pretend inmate. Well, I can't remember now.
No.
Is Kingsley's character a doctor in both?
Yeah, he's the head of the asylum.
He is the head of the asylum. So he's in on it, and this is his idea to let
yeah, but
the DiCaprio character wander
basically
around.
They kind of are toying the whole is they kind of toy the idea that maybe they're doing the whole are the inmates in charge of the asylum, but there's also this idea of are the doctors murdering patients and hiding them, or are these things, and those questions aren't necessarily answered in Shutter Island.
Yeah, that's sort of forgotten.
There's some other questions that happen, but like the real stuff that like gets mucked around with is the fact that they are trying a revolutionary new treatment of lobotomy in Shutter Island, which I have so much time for. Because if I wanted to watch that movie again, I'd just watch Sucker Punch.
That takes place mostly in an asylum. It's not a horror movie. That's why I didn't include it.
Yeah, I watched that one recently too. Because actually, I say that with a very mocking tone of voice, but I actually kind of like Sucker Punch still.
Yeah.
It's bad in parts, but like it's one of those that like it got a real bad rap for bad reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, not for its portrayal of an asylum. Like, it got every bad rap it deserved for that.
Yeah.
But part of the reason that rap is so bad is because of unreliable narrators, probably, but at the same time, Oscar Isaac is in it. And I forgot that because he wasn't Oscar Isaac yet.
Exactly.
It's like watching Attack the Block.
Yes.
And being like, oh yeah, you were so good. Anyway.
Yeah, Shutter Island, it was funny because I always thought of it as a sort of super classy version of Don't Look in the Basement. Well, now I know Don't Look in the Basement was based on the Post story. So
yeah,
that was where I had that connection from.
Yeah, it just kept opening up on you. They're all
Shutter Island's one where when the twist is revealed, to me initially I thought it was kind of dumb and really convoluted, but it ends on this ambiguous note that I find interesting, that DiCaprio's character knows.
Yeah.
And that he actually wants to forget and he wants to get the lobotomy, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. I do think the conversation he has with the
Mark Ruffalo.
No, he has a conversation with the person who knows who he is.
Oh, Ted Levine.
Ted
Levine.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, Ted Levine in his voice. Yeah. The Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's like, you're, I'm that guy you're looking for, I guess, but they know you told me when all this, and like the double meaning of that conversation when you know how the movie ends, like when you're in on it, is still just very good. Like,
yeah, that he will not sanction this buffoonery. He thinks this is stupid.
Oh no, that's not the conversation I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought you were talking about. So you're not talking about the one where he picks him up and he drives him back.
No, that one's also very good. I'm talking about the one where Hurley, the guy who ends up playing, I think he played Rorschach.
Oh yeah, Jackie or Haley.
Yeah. He's in it, and he plays a guy in a cell, and he's he's basically
So I didn't rewatch this, but I do.
Yeah, he plays a guy in a cell, and he's basically the crowning action of Act 2, or maybe he's like the last thing that happens before everything unravels in Act 3. But basically, DiCaprio comes in and talks to him, and Haley's character is like, DiCaprio's character is looking for a guy with a name, and he asks Haley's character if he's that guy, but the name that DiCaprio's looking for is his name, DiCaprio's character's name.
Right. Well,
and Haley's character is like, if you're looking for that, you don't know who you are, and you're seeing your wife, and you gotta let her go, because if you can't let her go, we can't leave.
Isn't there a Isn't there a Silent Hill game that has a very similar where it even ends in a I think it was the one on the Wii. It even ends in a lighthouse tower.
That's Alan Wake.
Was that Alan Wake? Oh, okay.
Alan Wake goes to a lighthouse.
Okay.
But
it was something I watched either you or one of our other friends play. It's not something I played by myself.
And that would, admittedly, if it was on the Wii, it could have been Frozen Memories, which is one of the very few Silent Hill games I didn't play.
Okay.
Alan Wake goes to a lighthouse, but that's on the Xbox.
I'm probably just forgetting.
No, it's cool.
I think it was. So you said it was called Frozen Memories. What did
Frozen Memories. Yeah. Alan Wake goes to a lighthouse. And there's like a huge storm behind him. I really like Alan Wake. You play a writer, and you attack everything with light.
Oh, okay. So I remember that game. That was a different game.
Yeah.
Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
Maybe it is Shattered Memories. Frozen. I remember a lot of things were.
It has a frozen girl on the cover.
Yeah, Shattered. That might be why I think it's Frozen Memories.
Yeah, this is what I was thinking of.
Okay.
Well, that has a similar plot, sort of, to.
I know that
It ends in a clinic.
It retreads the first game's plot a lot.
From like, yeah, different point of view or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, the guy, yeah, that's right. So the guy is living a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
He is not the father.
Yeah.
Boathouse, harbor, lighthouse, yeah, there. So that's what I was thinking of. So there's probably somebody, like 2 people listening to this podcast screaming, "Shattered memories!
Shattered memories!
Shattered memories!
Not Frozen memories! Betsy, you said you liked Silent Hill! What are you talking about? Yeah, I like Silent Hill. That's why I didn't play that one.
Yeah.
Come at me.
Release. Reception was average C's. Anyway, yeah, I think that was when I watched our other friends play.
Yeah,
anyway.
Probably. Our other friend told me not to play it, so.
That makes sense.
So.
So yeah. So Shutter Island, yeah, is another one that's sort of feeding off of this Poe story that everything else is based on.
Yeah. Well.
Which brings us to
our last one that is completely different.
It's so totally different story. This is the true modern version of a asylum movie, which is Gonjiam Haunted Asylum.
Yeah.
A Korean movie from 2018. And I was intending on watching this anyway because it has a very good reputation with like all the horror critics I follow on Twitter and Letterboxd. They all loved it. So
yeah,
I intended on watching it anyway.
I almost pushed real hard for us to watch this for our found footage. Mm-hmm. Except I threw all of my found footage weight behind Grave Encounters, and I do not regret it.
Which, to be fair, there would have felt a little repetitive because this has enough in common with Grave Encounters.
Yeah. I mean, I really, really liked what this did, and I'm really glad we watched it for this. Because I think it has some really interesting things, but almost nobody sees Grave Encounters, and I needed you to see it, and I've needed you to see it for years.
Yeah. But so this one is directed by Jung Bum-shik, who I'm not familiar with other than this movie. He hasn't done a lot of movies. This is, according to Wikipedia, the 3rd most popular / most watched South Korean horror movie. Based on ticket sales in the year 2018 when it came out. It is only surpassed by Kim Ji-woon's exquisite A Tale of Two Sisters, which actually might be my all-time favorite Korean horror movie.
It's so
and
good.
On Byung-ki's Phone, which is a very mediocre movie that I would not recommend watching.
It is not good.
Like, if you want to watch a Ring ripoff with phones, watch One Missed Call. At least you'll have fun watching Takashi Miike be weird.
Yeah.
But so this one is what we were talking about at the beginning, the idea that at a certain point, asylum horror movies stop being about what's going on inside the asylums as the horror movie, or even about people escaping from asylums. That's sort of an 80s thing. And it starts to be about the horror that was in the asylum, all the horrible things that were done to people. Is haunted the grounds that the asylum's on.
Yeah. It is about the permutations and like the penetration of the evil done there no longer is the people and like it is no longer that the insane are the villain. It is that the very evil done to them has become a malfeasance or a malicious entity that inhabits the whole ground. Like, we talked a little bit in, like, Mansions of Madness that potentially the asylum itself was evil and it had infected people. And so that there was a maliciousness of the asylum that was acting through, like, say, the guards.
Mm-hmm.
or the guy who took over was obviously a villain, but like there was some evil of the asylum itself that was acting through those who were insane.
Mm-hmm.
But once the asylums have been emptied, that evil that remains there cannot be that of the mad, it must be some other evil. And so usually it has to do with the evils that were inflicted upon people who were there. So, like, that
Uh,
has to be the pain and the suffering of people who were there wrongly or were there and who were supposed to be treated well and were instead tortured. So,
yeah, the first version of this I ever saw was the William Malone House on Haunted Hill remake
mhm.
from '99, which is a sort of fun, wacky horror movie, but has this idea that the spirits are these evil doctors, one played by Jeffrey Combs,
Mhm.
and sort of tortured patients that are trying to get their revenge after the fact.
Yeah.
That's and then I'm looking at our list, and then that becomes a very common thing throughout a lot of these.
Yeah, I think that it really does become, I think there's a big like turning point
Mm-hmm.
after the 70s in the United States where we kicked a lot of people out of asylums.
Well, yeah, actually, the really bad thing that happened, the last straw was that Reagan administration in the early '80s booted out a bunch of mentally ill people onto the streets and caused a mental health and homeless crisis that we're still kind of dealing with today.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of at first that was sort of like cool to exploit, but I think that eventually people realized that wasn't cool.
I mean, yes.
And so yeah, somewhere in the '80s this changes.
Yeah.
Um,
So instead of the mentally instead of the mentally ill being just terrifying because you don't see them and they're just someplace so that's a terrifying place people just disappear to. Now you know them because they're your community and you see the horrible things that have been done
mhm.
and you can extrapolate that, and then there are these empty falling apart buildings everywhere. And homelessness and the problems with homelessness and abandoned buildings are a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
But the idea of abandoned buildings being haunted and abandoned buildings being filled with unquiet spirits and those unquiet spirits being rife for horror movies has always been a rich topic. Those,
you get a lot of churches in earlier haunted things, or cases where a building was something was built in a spot that was sacred and it's not supposed to be there, so it's haunted now.
yeah,
Like Amityville Horror does that.
yeah,
Um,
um,
and so yeah, this insane asylum sort of became the a new frontier for that kind of thing. Excuse me.
and I think that especially with asylum horror things, with hauntings and stuff, people didn't want to move in, like, people did not want to fill up old asylum houses. Like,
Yeah.
those buildings were bad.
Hmm.
I mean, to say nothing of the medical waste that might be
Yeah.
there. Um, like, some of those buildings, it's hard to rent out a building that, you know, people used to be housed in. And, um,
Atrocities were committed.
yeah. And I mean, some of them were converted fine, but like those kind of stories are ones you tell around a campfire because you're bored.
Yeah.
And those are what make great horror movie fodder. And so that's kind of what we get now is because you don't find asylums in the same way. People don't get treated the same kind of our mental health facilities don't do the same kind of mental health treatments that they
Right.
did. Thank goodness. They do other things that aren't necessarily great, but um, we don't. We just don't have those kind of disregards for human autonomy. But
Mm-hmm.
we have stories of disregard for human autonomy, and we have a lot of spiritual unrest that we can shove into a building.
Right. It's a trauma. There's stories about war trauma haunting people. It's a trauma. So it's like a shared trauma thing.
Yeah.
Um,
A- And
this
so,
particular.
oh
Oh,
man.
go on.
And so this particular movie uh decides to pair that up with streaming internet broadcast, and it's delightful.
And it's sort of all predicated on a real hospital, the Gonjiam Psychiatric Hospital, which apparently they tried to film there and were not allowed. Uh,
Not
but it was
surprised.
all because there was a CNN travel listicle called "The Seven Freakiest Places on the Planet." And it's such a short article, I can read the entire description. According to local legend, patients started dying mysteriously in this hospital some 10 years ago, eventually forcing its closure. It is now an abandoned, dirty building with only the most disturbing remnants of its former life, such as rusted wire fences and disintegrating examination chairs. The hospital is famed as one of South Korea's three major haunted sites, the other being the Yeongdeok haunted house, roamed by ghosts from the Korean War, and the, oh, I don't know how to say this one, Nuobom Garden, a former restaurant where it is said you can still hear the sounds of dishes being washed in the kitchen. That's like the entire description. So it was funny to read that, and then the movie starts with the characters talking about the exact CNN, like this random CNN travel thing. Really, sort of like it sort of sounds like people in Korea were like, "What? We never heard of this," and then like, "Whoa, it's on CNN Travel. Let's go check it out."
I mean, totally. Like,
So it's like 20 somethings, 20 to 30 somethings have a YouTube channel where they go investigate haunted areas. So it's like a step more modern than Grave Encounters, which is sort of a Discovery Channel crew,
yeah.
like a Ghost Hunters crew. So like this is the next step up, which is even more believable. Is a YouTube channel. It's a well financed YouTube channel. Like they're planning on editing things, and they have really good equipment.
Yeah, they can edit, they have good equipment, but they're going to do a live stream.
Right, it's implied they've done before,
Yeah.
and that this one has enough. It has that kind of thing that happens in like Jaws and shit, where it has enough. Uh, it has the possibility of making them a lot of money, so the guy in charge just will not let them stop, even as things get scary or violent, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically they get like four crews together. Three or four crews together?
I think it's three crews, and I think that the viewing audience is only supposed to know about one or two of
Two
them,
of them?
and that the
Okay.
third is going in and making scary things happen because it's a sham.
Yeah. Yeah. So like they all get together and they're ostensibly one group.
Hmm.
Um but two of them, a girl in
It's a girl and a guy.
a girl in front of the camera and a girl behind the camera,
Oh, yeah, yes, okay,
have
yeah,
their own channel, and they've done a bunch of stuff on their own.
yeah. One of them is sort of she's sort of a, what do you call it? Like a jet setter that
Yeah.
goes. Yeah, she's like a sort of a YouTube influencer type
Yeah.
who has, and she's Korean, but she's like some sort of army brat or just wealthy enough that she has a anglicized name. Her name's Charlotte. She's the one name I can remember off the top of my head. And she does a lot of English language. She has like what do you, not call signs,
Catchphrases?
catchphrases. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and she's like signed her name places, and
and
she yeah.
is so the actress. I think the actress is actually doing the graffiti, and it's so good that it took me out of the movie for a second. I was just flabbergasted at how good her spray painted name Charlotte was. It was so nice, and you wonder if the actress was just practicing because she's like, no, no, let me do it. I can do this.
I can do this.
Or they just very cleverly just had her do the end. I suppose is possible too. But it took me out of the movie for a second because I was so impressed.
Yeah, it could be. It was good though.
So she's an outsider. There's a guy who they're kind of set up as the like. There's a slight hint that he's going to go crazy and do something bad. I think at the beginning of the movie, who's another outsider, but he's really just sort of a nervous guy.
Yeah.
With his baseball cap, I think he has throughout.
Uh-huh. Yeah, he's
And then it seems like the other people mostly know each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And like there's the main dude who seems like the most friendly of them, but he's the guy who stays in the tent.
Yeah, they call him Captain.
Captain.
So he's not even an on-screen personality.
Which is
he's
weird.
Sort of the producer.
Like,
yeah.
When it first came up, it seemed like he was going to be the main guy.
Yeah, it's like he hires talent.
I think...
So he definitely wants this to be a job, like a real big job. Like he wants this... He's the one person who has the most to lose if they don't go through with it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I almost wonder if he's the biggest actor of them. Not knowing
most of them were actually
new?
Not in very many things. Okay. I looked into it. The one girl who is, I can't remember the character name, she actually got award nominations for this. And
nice.
She was an actress. She's sort of the one who has the most dramatic stuff. She's the one who tries to help Charlotte.
She did so good.
Yeah. So she was, but a lot of the other cast was, they were sort of not big time stars, which has probably made it. That actually helps in those kind of found footage movies.
It really does.
If you're not recognizing faces.
Yeah. So basically they're going into this asylum, and there's this one door that nobody's been able to open to this creepy room.
And it's 4 stories, I believe?
Yeah, something like that.
So they're trying to work it story by story, and they have a plan, and that this horrible room is, I believe, on the top floor.
Yeah, it super is. It's on the...
And so they're kind of lead up. This is going to be their big moment.
Yeah.
That will get them all their subscribers.
They're trying to get 1 million viewers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very formulaic in its build up.
But it's very efficient too. Like it opens with one of these YouTube videos, these faux YouTube. I went to the what they claimed was the YouTube site. I was really hoping there was like augmented reality, like there was a real YouTube thing that had promotional bits. It does not exist, unfortunately. But that would have been really fun. But they give the whole plot of the hospital in this like 4-minute like rush, and then we get to know all the characters who are very likable. There's another movie we watched that we aren't talking about that was just called Horror Story, which is a Indian film that's on Netflix, and I didn't particularly like it.
It's not on Netflix anymore.
Oh, it's off there now. But
you can't find it.
Part of the reason I didn't really like it is because the characters were really unlikable, and they were all playing pranks on each other and just being kind of mean to each other. And in this case, even Captain, who is sort of the villain, is a likable guy.
He's super likable.
You have fun goofing off with them before they go into the...
Yeah, he's super likable until everybody leaves the tent. And he becomes despicable at that point.
Right.
Which is great.
Yeah, I mean, and it does, it has a good, because it's formulaic, it has a good way of like, we all know that shit's going to get real and that it's not all fake because we're watching a horror movie. But it has a really good way of transitioning from fake scares, which as an audience we learn to not be frightened about pretty early on, to real scares, which very nicely there's a lot of jump scares, but the really scary stuff focuses more on the dread and you know, having that in there, so it transitions very well. And I think if it wasn't formulaic, you would have to spend too much time explaining things to the audience instead of just letting them kind of experience it.
Yeah, it does a very effective job with all of its pieces, its build up.
There is some really, and I'm not. We discussed when we talked about found footage movies. I'm not particularly susceptible to found footage movie scares or jump scares in general. So I like good creative versions of it. This one has two scenes I really liked. One is there are disembodied hands that keep reaching around characters' faces to like cover their eyes, and as soon as one of their friends notices, because they're all wearing like
GoPros.
GoPros that look up at their faces and in front of them, so we're seeing it from both points of view. And as soon as one of their friends warns them, the hands retreat. I'm doing it. That's why I just hit the microphone. I'm doing it with my hands right now. And the idea that hands are like something out of your peripheral, and as soon as you notice that it disappears, that made me think of again video games, where the way to be scary isn't to put characters in an impossible situation where monsters are going to jump out from the shadows and eat them. It's to put them in a situation where they can defend themselves, but it's not going to be possible to continue to do it all night long.
Yeah.
So you can't continue to notice the hands reaching at you all night. That's way scarier. The idea that you have the tools you need to stop this from happening, but it's just not going to work out, is way scarier than just being jumped by something.
Yeah.
And then there's another really video game like scene where the girl is locked in a room with what looks like it's a very Silent Hill like thing. It's like a eviscerated corpse. Like it looks like there was some sort of autopsy done on it, and it's just standing there. And she's watching it. As long as she's watching it, it's not moving. So she's trying to move to the door and open it without taking her eyes off of it. And it sort of made me think of like the booze in Super Mario World.
Oh yeah, totally.
Where as long as you're facing them, you don't get attacked. Yeah, I thought that stuff all worked really well.
Yeah.
Better than jump scares.
Yeah. Like try to figure out the rules of the ghost house you're in.
Right.
Yeah. There's also...
I mean, yeah, there's some scenes where people just getting thrown around by loud noises, but, you know, that's just sort of a way to take some people out of the...
Well, there's also a very good one where there's a period where part of the crew is messing with the other part of the crew. Mm-hmm. Because part of the crew is in on the joke,
right,
messing with them. But as you know is going to happen as the audience, halfway through, the hospital takes over.
Right.
And that one is also very effective, I thought. Like, somebody sticking their hand in something.
Yeah, and so you think and that was the interesting about watching this right after Horror Story, is Horror Story has characters constantly doing that to each other, fake scaring each other. Mm-hmm. And this one, the first fake scare, is almost immediately revealed to be a real scare. And so it was like a breath of fresh air after so many fake scares that like, no, shit is real now. Yeah.
They did like one fake scare in the room before that was actually just really good and effective, because you were like, wow, they had to really set that up to work. Like, that was not just like piddly. And they had to like take a whole scene to show how they faked it.
Yeah.
But then the next one was like one of those stupid ones where you just like stick your hand in something and then it goes immediately bad. And then everything starts going worse. And you're like, oh, it's the beginning of the end. This is great.
By having the captain character staying in their little tent doing all the editing and stuff, and they are able to have a reason to rewind footage and show us things that were going wrong, and make us as the audience know that this wasn't what he intended, so he's being freaked out by it, and so the fact that the guy in charge is being freaked out is no good. And it immediately gets rid of the main problem all found footage horror has, which is why are they still filming?
Yeah.
They're still filming because the cameras are literally attached to them. And at a certain point, the ghosts start to use the cameras, basically. Which, why wouldn't you? If you're trying to freak people out and your whole lot in life is scaring and murdering people as ghosts, why wouldn't you take advantage of the fact that they've brought cameras in?
Yeah. Oh, and there's that one part right at like the very end where it's like, did the stream even ever start? Where
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, that's such a good little like denouement.
yeah.
Where it's
Because
like,
people are like leaving, like the stream is getting ready to go, and people are lining up, and then yeah, it ends, and everybody's just left. There's only like 500 people watching. There's one a cool idea that I didn't think worked out, where uh, the guy's using a drone to try to look at two things at once. So
yeah,
he's walking, and it's the same thing that happens in Grave Encounters, where uh, geography stops making sense, and walking through one thing, you suddenly are outside, or now you're suddenly inside. And so he's watching himself via he's using his eyes to move around, and then also watching himself move around via the drone. And the image never quite lines up, like they never quite figure it out as filmmakers. It's a cool idea, but it doesn't quite, it was very visually confusing. And you're just talking about the people who are setting up the scares. My favorite line uh, is they hear all the people freaking out as they're setting up another scare, and the girl says they're screaming like they're being chased by pirates,
it's
which is a very random, silly line, I thought.
a good line
Um,
though. Like,
yeah,
it's it just works so well. Like
yeah.
it was a good like capper on Asylum movies. Like it made sense why all the ghosts hated people.
I mean, if anything, I would have it have even more backstory. They don't explain a lot of the ghost stuff, and that is something like I like in the movie Wreck and Wreck or Record, if you would rather, Wreck and Wreck Two have all this as the movies go on. They just keep finding more lore about the building they're in, and it's another thing that feels kind of like a video game. Like if you're playing Resident Evil, you keep finding files and shit to read the lore of the area. So like if you want to play the game just through, you can. If you want to play the story, you can look at all the shit around you. That's like the one thing I felt was like I would have wanted more of them finding.
I mean, I do think that's the best part of any found footage like
Mm-hmm.
place is finding out why the stuff is happening. And yes, it was lacking. Like they didn't
It
really
could just use more.
yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Hmm.
They didn't do anything wrong. And honestly, the production design is so good that it just seems like it seems like I'm sure it's way scarier than the actual Gonjiam is. I'm sure that that's been somewhat cleaned out over the years, and
Yeah.
it's just like this perfect amalgamation of water damage and old file folders and papers that have been like started to like become part of the floor because they've been laying there for so long in such moisture. So yeah, those are the ones we watched. I believe you said that Exeter is
Yes.
one that might be worth sitting
I
through.
I really like Exeter. Let me just
And I again, I really do like House on Haunted Hill remake.
House on Haunted Hill
Um,
remake choice. Exeter is I would say Exeter is fun. It takes place in an asylum and it talks about it is one of those that wild things are happening in an asylum and a possession occurs and
okay,
the possession is said to be some resident of the asylum and they find out a lot of backstory, so it's both like demonic possession and asylum and um kids sleeping over in a place where they shouldn't be kind of movie. It's kind of a wheelhouse that I
mm-hmm,
enjoy
mm-hmm.
of horror movies. Um, Ordinary teens decide to experiment with the occult in an abandoned asylum. It's fun.
You have a couple franchise horror movies. Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell was the last of the Hammer Frankenstein movies. It takes place in Asylum. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is one where actually the kids are victims and the doctors aren't bad guys. That one's unusual. It's just Freddy is getting people in their dreams, so they can't stop it.
Yeah, that would and also good. And
yeah, and the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie as far as I'm concerned.
yeah, and a return of the protagonist from 1.
Nancy. Yeah, Nancy. Hellraiser 2, it takes place at least the first half or third in Asylum. And then Ginger Snaps 2 is a kind of interesting. I never saw the third Ginger Snaps, but Ginger Snaps 2 is it's less than a mental asylum and more of a place for dealing with drug addiction, but they kind of overlap. So it's
to give you a absolutely stone cold review, there's a movie called Clinical that I tried to watch for this, and I give it 0 stars. It was terrible. I think it both has to do with dissociative identity disorder and has a suicide attempt straight on the screen. I give it negative reviews if possible. Don't watch it. It's bad.
Yeah, one recent one that is genuinely frightening but makes some very bad choices, so I didn't like it, was Steven Soderbergh's Unsane, which is someone involuntarily committed. I won't, think it's a new enough movie that I won't spoil, but a certain thing happens at a certain point that kind of pissed me off and made me think it was a little bit regressive. But it is very frightening in that way, that stories where you know you're sane and no one else will believe you are frightening. That's a particularly harrowing kind of thing.
I mean, we also could have talked about Gothica for that kind of movie.
Which it's been so long since I saw that, but yeah.
I mean,
that was a similar...
Gothica is one of those weird ones. It is the dark reflection to The Fugitive, I want to say. Not...
Okay.
Because it is... I murdered my husband. I'm a doctor, but I woke up in my own hospital because I've been committed. And I need to have my colleagues break me out so that I can be acquitted of murdering my husband.
It's from the same studio and producers that did House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts. And so it is enormously early 2000s.
Yes. The thing about it...
And then also has a twist built into it because The Sixth Sense means that all horror movies of a certain grade had to have twists for a little while there.
Yes. And it's not a terrible movie, but
I don't think any of the Dark House... Well, I can't remember.
Nah, but...
Dark Castle. I don't think any of the Dark Castle movies were bad.
But it is one of those that should have a heavy sexual assault warning on it. Kind of out of goddamn nowhere. Like, it's one of those that you don't see it coming, and then it's like the whole third act is like what it's about. And it is not a thing that, like, as much as I've been bringing it up as a thing that has made movies unenjoyable for me, it's not like it's a trigger for me. I just know it ruins movies for other people. I don't particularly enjoy watching that, but I do know that it completely destroys movies for other people. I'm just usually like, this is boring.
Yeah.
This is an uninspired take. The whole thing about Gothica is a spirit of a person possesses her, potentially, to solve her murder, and she murders her husband because her husband had been kidnapping girls and raping them.
Yeah, I kind of remember that now.
Yeah, and that's the whole, like, Wait, what? And Robert Downey Jr.'s in it. And I think it's one of Robert Downey Jr.'s first, like,
Please accept me back
Yes.
kind of roles.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is right before Iron Man.
Yeah. Yeah. God, this movie's almost 20 years old.
I know.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's why I'm not remembering it, because it's been 18 years since I've seen
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I've watched a lot of, like, mediocre ghost horror movies, especially mainstream ones. Like, I didn't push for it because it is not, for asylum horror, it's much more of haunted revenge woman horror.
Mm-hmm.
She just happens to be put in an asylum, sort of, because she was a doctor, and that's, like, the twist on the revenge ghost stuff. The asylum genre, I feel, really goes down to the fear of lack of control over your own life, and whether that's being taken from you by society, whether that's being taken from you by your family, whether that's being taken from you by the undead. Like, that's kind of where the asylum horror lives. And that's kind of the fun place where you can watch a good asylum horror thing. You get to see where those lack of control issues, like, play out in a movie.
Before we go, I want to mention that we're recording this from our respective homes, not in person because of coronavirus. We both live in the Twin Cities metro area, and this is only a couple days after police murdered Dante Wright. So I'm going to include links in the description of this podcast and on the Genre Grinder website for the Memorial Fund for his family, and Brooklyn Center Mutual Aid Fund, and maybe some other local organizations. I can fit more of that on the Genre Grinder webpage, obviously, than I can in the description here. But, I mean, for all I know, I haven't checked Twitter in a while. There might be, there's probably protests going on right now. It is a little cold out today, but...
Yeah, I mean, lockdown doesn't happen for another half hour now, so they're probably out.
Yeah, that's the thing, is we're actually having curfews. I don't think that my smaller city has one, but there's been curfews, and there are military vehicles on corners. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, I can hear the helicopters over my house, so...
Yeah, you're closer to it than I am. And all this while the Derek Chauvin's case, the thing is going on right now, and there's still at least another week of that. So, yes, if you have money you can give to any of these things, please check the links. Otherwise, where can the people find you, Betsy?
Well, I think the best place to find me is probably just on Twitter. I am at Avatar of Chaos. And that's usually the best place to find me.
Okay.
You can also, yeah, that's the best. But also my podcast is Your Favorite Monsters, which you can find at yourfavoritemonsters.com. And we have a whole bunch of links where you can find us on Twitter, Tumblr, and our podcast feed. And
as per usual, you can find me at Gabriel Powers. I'm sorry, I'm not even mentioning. At Gabriel M as in Matthew Powers. The Genre Grinder Facebook page, at Genre Grinder on Twitter, the genregrinder.com website, and with the Now Playing Network website. I'm going to say goodbye. Do you have anything else to add, Betsy?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
Take care of yourselves, everyone.
All right, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
They see it right, they see it well, but they think this saves us from our hell. Sanitarium, leave me be. Sanitarium, just leave me alone.